Hi, and welcome to the second part of this tutorial. In the previous session, we saw how we could save these list of categories into the database and retrieve them back from the database and display them here. In today's session, we are going to see how we can make changes to this particular screen, save a payment, and view it displayed according to the category in which it was saved. So let us begin. We are going to start by making changes to the payment class. First, we're going to make it an entity, just as we did previously for the category. So we need a table name. We need to import this. And our table name is going to be payments. Again, I'm using plural, and I'm going to create a list of indices. So first, I'll create an index on the ID. I'm going to create an index on the ID, and I'm going to set that to true. So I want my ID to be true, and then I'm going to create another index on what I call the payment category ID. All right. Now, in my data class payments, I'm going to make the following changes. Primary key, auto-generate. We set auto-generate to true, and we give this column a name. Right, and we set the value to 0 so that when we're defining it, we don't have to provide an ID. Awesome. So next will be the column info name for this. I'm going to call it payment title. It's be of type string. I'm going to call this payment date. And then I'll be introducing one more, the category ID that I created here. Oh, it's down here, yeah. Okay, payment info, name equals payment category ID. This would be of type long, yep. And then I would include the amount that it cost us, or the payment is worth. Okay, and that'll be of type double. All right. So yeah, this is it. Next, over here, we see that we are going to be supplying a payment category ID. That means that this payment has a relationship with the category. So this ID represents the category that a payment belongs to. Excuse me. So by that doing, we need to provide a foreign key, and Room allows us to do it this way. So I'm going to create a foreign key, and it's going to take a number of parameters. The entity that contains the entity that is the foreign key, in this case, it's going to be the category ID that we established in the relationship to. The parent column. This is the column in this parent class, or in the category class that we are referencing to. And this is a category ID, so it references this column name here, ID. So I'm going to use this ID in here. And then the child column. The child column here represents this particular class that I am in. What name of the column matches this particular ID. In this case, it is this one. So I'm just going to copy this and I'm going to paste that. And then we also have on update. This technically means that when we update the parents, what happens to the child? So I'm just saying it should cascade, meaning that when I perform an update on the parents, it propagates to update the child as well. And then on delete, when I delete the parents, what should happen? It should cascade, it should affect the child as well. So this is it. This is how we define it. And then we go to our database. First, we need to create a DAO. So we create a payment DAO, a payment data access object. Yeah. And then in our database, we need to reference that. So we need to do that. We need to add a payment class to our list of entities. And then we have our abstract fund payment DAO equals payment DAO. Great. So now that we have this in the database, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to delete this, and I'm going to delete this as well. I do not need this application. It's already done. Okay, so now I have my payment DAO. All right, but first of all, we need to annotate it, the data access subject, so we know that it is, and this is supposed to be an abstract class. Okay, so in a similar way to the way we did category, let me just open a category one, where we provided various queries, and we will do the same thing for the payment. And so technically, I'm just going to copy paste what I've already set up, which is very simple: to suspend insect payment. I don't want to bore you with these details. We've already done this in the previous video, the part one of this particular video. But of course, you can always check it out. But this is for inserts, this is for updates, this is for delete. And then we would come to the queries a bit later. But I want to introduce you to a new class that I will call payment. Okay. Now I am creating this class to establish a relation between my payment and my category. Room database does not allow you to embed an object in another. And so what we are going to do is to create this intermediary class that would combine payment and its associated category objects together. So I'm going to introduce this embedded, and let in its var payment. I'm going to just declare payment here. Then I'll use a relation, and the parent column of the relation in this case is a payment category ID, and the entity column is going to be ID. All right, so I'm saying that a parent category in this case is within the payment class. And then the ID of the entity that I want to put in here. So when we open our payment, excuse me, over here, we have a category ID. Now, what I am trying to do is that whenever I retrieve a payment, it should have the associated category, not just the category ID. Of course, it's going to return the category ID when we load from the database, but this particular class is ensuring that this category ID actually helps us return an object of type category. All right, so we are going to do this, and we say categories should be a list of category. Okay, so we don't know how many instances there are going to be, so we are returning a list. We're going to ignore this in the response. And then we're just going to return the first element of the list of categories that we would have. Now, we want to this structure. In other words, we just want to make sure that this particular class can be somehow broken down so that you have access to its consistent elements. All right, so we do an operator fun component 1. And we are saying our first component should be the payments. And we do the same thing. We say our component 2 should be the category. Okay, now each object has the equals and hash code methods. So we are going to override the equals and the hash code, and then also a toString, but we are just going to override these two. All right, so let's work with the equals then. We're going to say if other with any object is equal to this one, that means that it's not just equal to, it matches this exactly, then we're just going to return true. But if it is a type of payment to category, then we're going to say payment is equal to other.payment, and categories is equal to other.categories. Whatever, if this is true and this is true, this is going to return true. If one of them is false, it's going to return false. So else will return false. All right, so that is what our equals is going to do. It's just going to check whatever object it is that we are looking at, whether it matches. If it doesn't, then it throws an appropriate value. And then in our override hash code, we're just going to call objects.hash. And then we provide our payments and our categories. Awesome. So that is all that we're going to do for this payments to category. And we are going to be using this pretty much soon. Okay, so we can go back to our payment DAO and retrieve some data. So what we want to do is we want to we're going to write a query to using the 3 to allow me to write on multiple lines. So select everything from payments. And I'm going to perform an inner join on the categories table. And just make this. Categories table, and I'm going to make this join on payments, a payment category ID. Cross categories ID. Where my payment category ID equals, then I provide a category ID. And abstract fund payments from category. I'm going to return a list of, now this is what I'm going to return. I'm not going to return a list of payments, but I'm going to return a list of payment to category. So it's going to select the payment objects, and then join it with a category object that matches this condition, that my payment object's payment category ID matches all the categories in the categories table with that specific ID. And I am providing that ID here to match. And so this is since we are joining on categories, it means that we could possibly have a list of categories with a similar ID, possibly or not. And so we're going to be returning a payments to category, a list of payment to category objects. Okay. This is it. We can also, of course, I can also show one more query, which you probably already know. Select star from payments where set ID equals payment ID. Okay, I need one more, and then this is false, so I need to take that out. And this is, of course, going to be, I'm just getting payment ID long, and I'm going to return a flow of payments. Okay, or we could simply return payments. That is, if the payment doesn't exist, it returns a null. Okay. So this is what I need. This is enough for the payments DAO, so we can go further. Now, the next thing I would do is to create the payment repository here. So I call this payment repository. And my payment repository, I'm going to pass my payment DAO. Remember, it's the repository that communicates. So I'm going to leave a comment here, and I'm going to say a data repository for payment instances. Great. And so I just want to return, okay, let me write it out first before I leave the comments. So function payments in category. So I just want to return the list of payments in category. So I'm going to provide a category ID. And that would be a flow list of payments to category. So see, because this data is going to contain the categories, I'm not using simple payments. I'm using a payment to category. Okay, so what is this going to do? It's just going to return, it's going to use the payments now dot payments from category and then provide a category ID. Awesome. So we have connected our payments repository to the payments DAO. Next, I would want to add a new payment. To the store, and this returns a flow containing a list of payments associated with a category with the given category ID. Okay, so what does this function do? I'm going to make this a suspend function because I wanted to add a payment asynchronously. So it's just going to be of type payment, and all that we're going to do is call the payment DAO. Let's add insert. Then we provide a payment. All right, so this is so easy, adding a payment. Okay, so now that that is done, we would go back to our payment and make some changes to our payment UI. Okay, where is payments? Here we go. All right, so I'm going to take this date off according to the new design. Your job would be to build something that works with dates. I mean, allow the user to select a date. Okay, so here I'm just going to add a modifier, and I'm going to set my modifier to fill max width. I admit there are cleaner ways that you can do this. Hold on, gonna text. This is a main title or payments. Yeah, I'll just leave it as payment title, go your payment description. And we want to change this. We want to provide a drop down that contains a list of categories instead. So we're going to remove this guy and we're going to say category list drop down, and we'll provide it with a view state and the category. Okay, so we need to go ahead and create this composable. All right, so composable private fund category drop down. And we need the view state, excuse me. It's got a payment view. Payment view state, which clearly doesn't exist yet. And category which should be a mutable state of type string. Well, mutable state exists, we can, but our payment view state does not exist. That is because we haven't created a payment view model yet. All right, but we can go ahead and create this. So since it's a dropdown, it can be expanded. So we are going to remember the value, mutable state of false. So we initially it is not expanded. Let's look at this a bit later. We are going to change the icon based on whether it is expanded or not. So if expanded, we go to icons.field. Arrow drop down, drop app. Else it's going to be icons.field, arrow. Capital F, capital F. All right, so this arrow drop down is not working because it requires the Android x.compose.material icons extended dependency. All right, so we need to add this dependency for it to work. Okay, so to do that, we're going to build.gradle. And when we have the material design, we just paste the following, which is technically implementation, the same thing. And then you need to add a compose version at the end. So we think while that is syncing, I want to take a look at this the next time. I want to make sure that I got this right. Yeah, that's okay. So now that it is done, we should be able to import this here. All right. So let's proceed with this. And so we start the view itself, which is a column. And then we're going to use the outlined text field. And here we're going to say category.value. We're going to pass the category value in there, and on value change, we want to set whatever value it is to the category.value. Okay, we can go ahead, add some modifier to fill the maximum width. And we can provide some label. And our label is going to be our category. And we can say this should be read only. And then our trailing, we can provide a trailing icon. And this is where we make use of the icon, and our image vector is going to be the icon that we defined based on a condition outside. And our content description could be null. And then our modifier, we are going to use modifier. We're going to set this, we're going to make this icon clickable. So when it's clicked, we want our expanded to be equal to the negation of expanded. So what this is doing is that if this guy is true, currently it is false. So since it is false, when we click, we are going to negate false. So it becomes true, then it opens. When we click it again, since it is true, it's going to negate, it's going to be false. So it closes. So that is our outline field, but we're not done yet. We are not done yet. We now need to handle the drop down itself. So drop down menu. Drop. Yeah. All right, so I'm just going to clear this and I'm going to. Okay, so expanded is going to be expanded at the top. And what happens when we dismiss, we are just going to set our expanded back to false. And then, of course, our best friend modifier, because modifier to fill the whole width. Okay, so we need to handle in here, we need to display the list of values that will be coming from our view states. But since we haven't created our view state yet, we are going to go ahead and create the payment view model. Yeah. All right. So let's look at a payment view model. Our payment view model is going to be using, of course, the payment repository. And it's also going to be using, let's just initialize this graph dots. Excuse me, this should be payment repository. And it's going to be using a category repository graph dot category repository. Okay, so we had defined our payment repository, but we haven't put it into the graph. Yeah, so we can quickly do that. It's going to be the same thing as the category. All that we have to do is copy and paste, and we'll change this name to payment repository, and we'll have to change this to payment DAO, and we need to change this as well to payment repository, and we import this because it is not in this file, and this should be payment DAO. Okay, so I think we're better off just writing the whole thing from scratch. All right, so now that this is available, we can go back to our payment view model, and it is in there. Great, so we proceed by extending a view model class. And now we can start writing stuff. Okay, so what do we want in our in here, we want a data class, and we need to provide a payment view state. So we create a payment view state that holds the state of this class and the data in this class. And all that we want from here is a list of categories. And we initialize it to empty. All that we want here is a list of categories. So as usual, we create a val, private val state, and we define that to mutable state flow of type payment use state. Okay, then we expose our state through state flow. Fixed payment view state. We import state flow. And we do this using the getter, and we say get, we return state. Okay. Now we need to create a function here that would save the payment and then also retrieve a list of categories when we launch. So I'm going to create a suspend fund for save payments. And of course, it's going to take a payment object that should return a loan. And all that I'm going to do is to call the payment repository, payment repository, and say add payment, and then provide the payment object from here. So we have our function that will save our payment. But when we initialize, what do? We call our ViewModel scope. We need to load the list of categories in here. So we make use of our category repository, and that gives us a function called categories that retrieves a list of categories, actually a flow of a list of categories. And so we need to collect the data even as it comes. So our collect is going to return a list of categories. We can do this. And all that we're going to do is state.value equals our payment states. And that takes categories. It's the only entity in there, so we don't have to give it a named parameter, but we could still have got categories equals categories. But technically, we call repository calls this function, which is within the repository, to return a list, a flow list of categories. And collect helps us to accept whatever values have been emitted from the repository. So we collect it, and it's going to be in the list, and we set that to our view state. Okay, so this is it. We go back to our payments, and in our drop-down menu, now the data that view state has, we want to set that here. So we call our view states categories, and then we can loop over the data that we have. So we can say selection option, drop down menu item. And our drop down menu item will have an on click. So when we click, what should happen? When we click, we want to set our categories value to the value that was just clicked, the name. And we want to set our expanded to false. So when we select an item from the drop-down list, we want to close the list. And our text is going to be the option or the list of categories. Let me just call this category, since it's a list of categories. So to make things clearer, okay, if we use category here, we are using certain category after that. So let's say drop down option. Okay, yeah, the naming is not the best, but it gives you an idea of what we're doing. Yeah, so text is equal to that. And what is the issue here? Because mutable state initialize the passing value. I already have this imported. Why is it's my mutable state. Yep. Import. Okay. Yeah, we just had to import the set value. That was interesting. Okay, so we need to provide a category and a view state, and that needs to go into the payment definition. All right, so what we're going to do is that we're going to pass the view model, the payment view model, like we did previously. Okay, this guy is still giving me problems. I need to import this manually. And then we're going to get our view state from our view model dot state dot collect as state. All right, so now we have access to our view state, and yep, I need to manually import this. Let me just look at the other repository. I didn't do this here. Payment view model. No. Where exactly did I do this? Import view model. Okay. Let's import lifecycle. All right, so the 100x.lifecycle.viewModel.compose.viewModel somehow just doesn't get imported. Okay, so the next thing is the category, and where are we going to get a category from? All right, so when we want to save, we're going to show how we're going to handle this one. All right, so we want to make a payment on a click of a button. We want to save our payment, but currently we are not getting the value of any of these fields. All right, we are not getting the value from any of these fields. And so we need to do that right now. So I'm going to say val title up here. Val title equal to remember, savable. And it's okay. Then I'm just going to say mutable state of empty. And then I'll copy this and paste it multiple times. I'm going to change one to category, and I'm going to change the other to the amount. So there is none for date here, but you will have to handle one for date here when you try out the exercise. Okay, so now our category is passed. We see where the category is coming from. What about the title? So we are going to come in here, and over here, we're going to change this empty value. We're going to say title.value. And then what happens on value changed? On value changed, we want to set title.value equals whatever is in that particular field that has been put in that field. And so we are going to do the same for amount. So it's going to amount.value. And it's going to be amount. The value equals it. And technically, that is it. In this amount field, we want to add some extra stuff like keyboard options. And we want keyboard options. I want to set a keyboard type here to number. Since you're only typing an amount, you just want number. You don't want any text in there. All right. So we come to our button here, and our trouble now is going to be on the onClick. I'll set this to true as well, just to show you that we can, there are so many properties that we haven't looked at yet. So what happens when we click? When we click, we want to call our ViewModel, our payment ViewModel, and say save payment. And it needs a payment object, so we can create one here. And our payment object requires a payment composable. Hold on. Yeah, I know this is a suspend, but that shouldn't stop me from making. Okay. All right. We know our payment requires a payment title. So we are going to get that from the title. Okay, I wanted to reserve this for last, but I just want to resolve this issue this quickly. All right, let me take this off. And we are calling save payments, but we know our save payment is a suspend function. When we created in the ViewModel, we created as a suspend function, but we cannot call a suspend function from in here. If you are calling a suspend function, you should be calling it from within another suspend function or a coroutine. So as you can see here, suspend function, save payment should be called only from a coroutine or another suspend function. All right, so what we're going to do is that we're going to define a coroutine and coroutine scope. And yes, I think this is it. Yep. So we're just going to define a coroutine scope, and we are going to say remember coroutine scope. Then in here we are going to call our coroutine scope dot launch. So we are just going to run this inside our launch ViewModel dot save payment, and the error is gone. Now we can call as payment So we can call our payment title, and we are going to say title.value. Then we can say our payment amount. And it's going to be amount.value. Then we can say payment date. I'm just going to set this as today's date, the current date. But this, I'm using a date object and I am required to provide a long. So we'll fix that in a moment. Over here as well, you can see that our payment, we require a double, but this value here is a string. So we can say to double, we can convert our string into a double, and that works fine. And we are doing this because we know that our keyboard is of type number. And so whatever value is going to be in there, it's definitely going to be of type number. So we can convert it to a double. And then I think the last thing would be the payment category ID. This should be the ID of the category, the selected category. But our category is a mutable string. And so we would create a function for get category ID. And this is going to take view states dot the list of categories, as well as the category dot value. All right, so there are two things to fix. I'm going to go down here and I'm going to create a private method. So private fund gets category ID, that takes a list of categories. And the category name of type string. And all I want is the ID of that particular category. All right, so we already have the list of categories coming down from our view states. And so we just need to loop through that and find which of them has the name that matches our category value and return the ID of that object. So we are going to do return categories.first. And we're going to say that category name equals category name. And what we want is the ID of that particular object. So this is going to loop through the list of categories to find the first object whose name matches the name that we have supplied. And then we are going to return the ID of that object. So this is it. And with regards to the date, all right, so this is a date, but we need a long. So all that we need to do here is to use .time. And .time is going to return a timestamp in milliseconds. So it's going to be a long, and it's just going to take today's date and it's going to convert it into a timestamp for us. Okay, so this should be it without any issues. We should be able to save an item into the database. Now there is an error here that we need to fix. Okay, we need to resolve this payment view model. It needs to use, this was the initial data that we were adding to the database, adding to the list. We don't need that anymore. Actually, I'm just going to go ahead and clear all of this. And here as well, our payment is going to be payments to category because we want the category information in our payment list. And then, yeah. So over here, we are going to pass the category ID to this particular payment view model. I'm just going to clean this. My imports, these are unnecessary imports. All right, so when we select a particular category at the top, okay, so when we select a category here, for instance, health, we are going to be passing the ID of health in here so that we can load and display payments that are associated to health. So we need this ID. That is what this category ID is going to be handling. All right, so whichever category we press, we need to pass the ID of that particular category. And then we need to retrieve data for that particular payments that are associated with that particular category ID. All right, so the next thing we'll also need is going to be our payments repository, which we can get from the graph.payment repository. And yes, we have our view state. Our state already exists. And so all that we need to work on is in here. So in our view model scope, we are going to say, okay, let's get payment repository.payments in the category that we have just called. And let's collect that. So we are going to have a list of payment category items, and we are going to say our state.value should be equal to category payment view state. And we pass our payments to, we pass the list to payments. And that is all we need to do here. All right. Now that this is done, we need to ensure that when we, in a payment category, everything matches. Okay, that's not. So we need to fix things before we go in. So we'll need to pass our category ID here. And then our view model. Awesome, we need to do some magic over here. But our view model needs something. So I'm going to expand this. I'm going to provide a key, so a category list. And a factory. And that factory is going to say view model provider factory of category payment view model. All right, so we are trying to pass the category ID that is going to be coming to payment to our category payment view model, but there is no easy way to do that. And so Google has provided a utility class that we would need to use, but it is not provided natively. So we'll have to create a utility folder and I'm going to call that package util. And in here, I'm going to define I'm going to call it ViewModel. And in this ViewModel, I'm just going to copy and paste this utility function from the Google Docs. So I'm going to clear this, and I'm going to paste. I'm going to paste this. So what this is doing is that it's taking a ViewModel. It's creating a function of type ViewModel, and it's just going to call this create function in there. And it makes use of ViewModel's own ViewModel provider, and then it tries to create a factory object out of it. And it implements this simple factory class, which is private, which extends, of course, the ViewModel provider factory. And all that it does is that it overrides the onCreate, and it just checks if the model class, that is the class that we are passing to it, is of type a ViewModel. If it is, then it returns it. If it is not, then it says that it cannot create a ViewModel for it. So that is all. But this is going to allow us to be able to pass the ID to our ViewModel class. So we just create a factory of our ViewModel. And nice, that is done. So we can now use ViewModel.state.collect as states and what payments. Okay, this is expecting a list of payments, but I am supplying payment category, payment to category. Yeah, payment to category. And so we need to look at this payment list, and this should be payment to category. Okay, so this works fine then. And over here in our payments list, we should have a lazy column, yes. And then because now our item is a payment to category, we need to get the payment item itself. And then I'll create one for category and say item.category. On click, we don't do anything. So over here, we need to create a category. And we call this category. And then we import. All right, so in the title, it's going to be a payment to the title. In the category over here, now we need to change this. It's going to be category.name. And here as well, it's going to be payment.date. Now our date here is a long, which is a timestamp. So we'll need to convert this into an appropriate date object. Date string. I just want to check that everything else matches. So we would have to change this extension function. And I'm going to keep that, but I'm going to create a new extension function on a long object. And I'm going to say to date string. So I'm converting my long timestamp into a date string, and I'm asking it to return a string. And so I'm going to copy the same thing, and I'm going to just paste it here. And instead of this format, yeah, I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to say dot format date this. All right, so to convert a long into a date object, I just need to pass the value, the timestamp into the date object, and it's going to convert it for me. And that is all. So I'm going to use this to date string here. So I'm just say to date string, because this value is a long, it's just going to work. Okay, so I think this is it. I think we are done. So let's try this. Let us see if this works. All right, so the other day, the fix that I did was to introduce a bias so it could float the text. I'm going to show that when it loads. Okay, I don't think this is going to work yet because we haven't made use of this payment category. We commented it out. Yeah, see, it is not used. So in our home, yes, we commented it out. I guess we're not done yet. This payment needs a category ID. Our category ID should be from the selected category. .id. Okay. Now I can stop this build and do it again. Okay, now it's highlighted. So yes, it's been used. Okay. We click on login and it crashes. All right, it says room cannot verify the data integrity. Looks like you changed schema but forgot to update your version number. All right, so I can simply make this change by going to data room database and changing my version number to 2 because I added a payment. I need to update. So I change it to 2 and let's run it again. Okay, so still nothing because we just installed the application. Let's go to payment. Now when we click on this icon, we see the list of categories being loaded from the database and being displayed here. So I want to provide it. I had some beggar yesterday. So I'm going to provide an amount. And I'm going to say it's 12.5 euros. And I'm going to hit the save payment button. Oh, okay. All right. So we are saving, but we are not handling after it has finished saving. What should happen when we are done saving? We should call the on back press, so this screen goes back. All right, so I just want to show you that this has saved. I'm not going to click on save anymore. I'm just going to go back. And I'm going to click on food, and the burger that I saved is there. All right, and it's, of course, I'm using today's date, so you can see that it is saved. And we have that check mark and the name, the title that I put there, and it's of category food, which is awesome. But now I want to fix this, that when we click on this save payment button, when we are done saving, it should go back. And so I'm going to go back to my payments. And over here in my on click, when everything is done, I want to call the on back press. We already have this on back press passed to us. So we're going to call it, and we are going to rerun this. So we have food here. Let's create another pizza, and we call it food again. Of course, pizza is food. And we click on save, and then it just closes it and brings us in here. Now we click on health. There is nothing, there is nothing, nothing. But immediately we come here, we're going to see some data. All right, so purchased, Nokia stocks. And I'm going to say that is investment and 200 euros. And when I go to investment, it is there. So great, our application is working fine. Now, what I want you to do is to validate this. For instance, if I say Coca-Cola, and I choose that as a drink, and I'm saying, and I say 3 point, instead of points, and I use 3.2, it's going to crash. And it's going to crash because the input string is not valid. And so that is going to be your task. I want you to validate inputs that go into the payment, but our task here is done. For now, we are going to continue with this in the next tutorial. Thank you for watching.